Shalom, shalom. We are talking about Parashat Vayetze. I want to encourage you to carefully read the scriptures in this week's Parashat. Read it carefully for yourself and by yourself. It is rich beyond measure and beyond treasure too. Regarding this video, I'm not a teacher, I'm a student, and I'm merely sharing what I've learned from reading this Parashat, these scripture portions. I want to say, if you disagree with my remarks and my interpretation, please let me know. Don't crop it up, but we both will learn if you share your alternative views, and I'm looking forward to that. So ready, aim, and fire for that. It will be a blessing to both of us. This week's scripture from the Torah is Genesis 28 verse 10 up to verse 32, verse 3. It's called Parashat Vayetze. And the half Torah or prophet portion is from the prophet Hosea, the last 3 chapters in his book. And the gospel portion is from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 19 to 51. And different to the disciple John, it deals mostly with John the Baptist, but very interesting. But back to the Torah portion that we're talking about. This is the 7th of 54 Torah portions in the year. It's so jam-packed full of interesting morsels and tidbits that I expect that I'm going to end up making at least 3 videos on this parashat in order to keep it to bite-sized chunks that can be digested. So please bear with me in that. In last week's parashat, we learned all about Jacob and Esau's early years together. And then that brings us on to this week's parashat. It's after Jacob supposedly stole the blessing from Esau, and now he's on his way to Padan Aram, also looking for a wife, or 2 or 4, for what it's worth. The parashat takes us to Jacob's travel, and the major moments is his headstone at Beit El, and I'll spend most of this video talking about that. And then in the next video I'll speak mostly about Shulam Yaakov, Jacob's ladder, because that is amazing. Then we go on to Jacob's meeting of Rachel, and his love for her at first sight. And then there's a wedding scandal, some rivalry between the wives, not some, a tremendous rivalry between his wives. We read then how Isaac's blessing on Jacob bears fruit. Actually, it bears lambs. It yields lambs in the flocks that he's watching. And that leads to a souring of relationships between Jacob and Laban, and ultimately leads to a peace agreement between them, and then his return to the promised land. And each one of these major moments, there's so much to talk about. But let's first just maybe have an overview of what we can expect in a Pardes reading of this parashat before we jump into his headstone. The Peshat level, of course, as it's written, we read the history of his return journey, a period that spans more than 20 years of his life. On the Ramesh level of reading with reflection, it is hinted that Hebrew beauty is better than Greek beauty. And that particularly comes forth when we talk about the wives. Hebrew beauty, inner beauty. Hebrew beauty means because something is good, because it is tov, therefore it is beautiful. In contrast with it, Greek beauty is because something is outwardly beautiful, therefore it is good. It is diagonally opposed to each other, the Hebrew and the Greek concept of beauty. And as I say, we'll find that on Remes reading of the Parashat. Then on the Darash level, we learn how adversity can lead to blessing if we remain true to God's calling on our lives. And we read this in the life of Jacob, and the application, Darash level in our life is that if we remain true to our calling, so will God. He will also remain true. And the adversity we suffer will turn into blessings. On the Sod level, there's so much to talk about in Jacob's ladder, Shulam Yaakov, that we'll talk about that in the second video. And there's more, even on the return journey, more Sod level mystery to revel in, I want to say. Okay, let's go back with the beginning of the parasha. And this beginning, I'm going to call it, let's talk about Jacob's rocks. It's Genesis 28, verse 10 to 12, refers specifically to the headstone. So Jacob left home in search of a good wife. That was the primary goal. But there was a very important secondary goal, and that is to steer clear of his brother Esau until Esau's temper cooled down. So Jacob traveled about 75 kilometers to Beersheba, or from Beersheba to Luz, which means that it was probably 2 days at the very least, but more likely 3 days journey for him to reach Luz at nightfall. And nightfall prevented him from traveling any further that day. He was close to Luz, as I said. And then the question is, why did he sleep outside the city? Why did he not go into the city and slept at the inn, enjoyed some Luzite hospitality? The Bible doesn't answer this question directly, but it's quite possible that Jacob arrived after the city gates were closed and locked for the night, and that's why they wouldn't let him in. After all, he was a stranger and posed some risk to them. But there may also have been some animosity between the successful Hebrew herdsmen of the south and the people in Luz, in some sort of intra-city rivalry between Jacob's family, Abraham's family, Isaac's family, and Beersheba and Luz. I believe that no customary hospitality was rendered. The truth is that God had a divine appointment with Jacob, and he willed the gate to be locked and the city to be inaccessible to Jacob, so that he will not be distracted by what's going on in the city, the nightlife. God wanted his full attention for a dream that was so rich in meaning to Jacob, but also to us. Is it not so that in our lives doors also close for us when they lead us away from the purpose of that God has for our lives? But when we remain in his purpose, doors open for us. It's the same with Jacob outside of the city of Luz. It often brings Jacob and us, to our initial realization that God has other plans for us. So Jacob set up a stone as a headrest. As the cultural norm in the time, you have to ask yourself, why is it even worth a mention in the Bible that he set up a stone as a headrest? And the answer is given in Genesis 28, verse 17 to 22. that is the following day, Jacob anointed the stone with oil and set it up as a memorial. And then he changed the name of the city from Luz to Beit El, the house of God. So that's the reason why it is mentioned that he used the stone for a headrest. It became a monument. At this stone, Jacob made what looks like a conditional vow to serve God and to give his tithes to God. But the conditions that he states is actually a confirmation that he accepts the covenant that God renewed with him. So with the headrest stone set up as a memorial, it is highly unlikely that Jacob or anybody else, like the prophet Jeremiah, for example, would have removed the stone from there. It served its purpose as a monument in the place where Jacob set it up. In fact, we know that the stone was never removed but remained in place at Beit El because God himself refers to it in Genesis 31, which we'll come to maybe next week. Genesis 31 verse 13, God uses that stone as a means to identify himself. However, this stone opens quite a few interesting rabbit holes for us. And if you are a sucker for a good Alice in Wonderland adventure, like I am, then this is just manna from heaven. Claims about Jacob's headstone includes a number of things. The longest one I'm going to share with you is regarding the stone of scone. It's also known as the stone of destiny, or the coronation stone, or the Tanist stone, or as Klach na Geneamheim in Scottish Gaelic. I'm sorry to any Scottish listeners that I butchered your language. That is my best attempt for now. All these stones are reported to be or claimed to be Jacob's headstone. The stone of scone, by whatever name, is a red sandstone block. It's 660 millimeters long, about 420 millimeters wide, and 267 millimeters thick. It weighs 152 kilograms. And it's been used for centuries in the coronation of monarchs, the monarchs of Scotland specifically. From the ruin of the stone of Scone Abbey near Perth in Scotland, and it was brought there by Kenneth MacAlpin, the Conqueror, in the year 841 AD, and he brought it from the island of Iona. Irish legend claims that the prophet Jeremiah brought the stone to Tara in ancient Ireland, and that it was used to coronate the Irish kings upon, I should have said, my apology, Irish high kings. Presumably before Fergus, the son of Eric, the first king of the Scots, transported it to Argyll for his own crowning ceremony. In the year 1296, Edward I captured the stone when he invaded Scotland and moved the stone to Westminster Abbey, where it was fitted into a wooden chair known as King Edward's chair. In spite of stories that it was a duplicate, as the original was hidden away either in the River Tay or buried in Dunnasnany Hill by Scottish monks, the stone of scone was used in 1953 for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. I'm not sure about the coronation of King Charles, whether that actually happened or not. I don't know. Forgive me for that. But back to the stone. In 1914, there was an attempt to blow up the stone of scone with explosives. And in 1950, a group of Scottish students stole it and either willfully or accidentally broke it into two pieces. Maybe it was just heavy and they dropped it. better drop the stone than the bear. Either way, the bigger piece was initially lost and the smaller piece recovered from a cellar with the assistance of an American diplomat. The bigger piece was then recovered about 4 months later, and the stone was repaired and left on the altar of Arbroath Abbey in 1951. It was handed back to the Scots in 1996 and now rests alongside the Scottish crown jewels in Edinburgh Castle. The Stone of Scone is not theology, but it is folklore, or at best it is British history from a unique point of view. Incidentally, investigating geologists found that the stone of Scone, was cut from a quarry located about 3 kilometers from Scone Abbey, confirming rumors that the stone is a fake. And their estimate is that the stone dates back to the late 1700s AD, to the 18th century, in other words. Another rabbit hole to dive in regarding the stone exists in the claim of an American corporate building who claims that Jacob's headstone became the cornerstone of this building. I read about this some time ago, but in a Google search preparing for this video, I could not find any detail about it, so forgive me for not naming the particular building that it's built into, that it's claimed to be built into. And then let's look at the Midrash. The Midrash teaches that Jacob actually took 12 stones, one for each of his yet unborn sons, and that these stones miraculously merged into one stone during the night. But there are variations on the theme, and some variations says no, it was 3 stones symbolizing 3 temples that was built in Jerusalem. And another variation say no, it was 4 stones that merged into one, symbolizing the 4 wind directions. In my opinion, these accounts from the Midrash represent interesting grandfatherly tales and not worth much religious water. It won't hold water. Jacob's journey was full of stones. The pillow stone was merely the first, but it's followed shortly by a very large stone that covered the well at Padan Aram when he arrived. Motivated by love at first sight when he saw Rachel, Jacob moved that large stone by himself so that Rachel or Rachel's flock could be watered. And then, sticking to the theme of stones, during Jacob's return journey, he and Laban or Lavan made a covenant, and they also marked the spot on which they reached the covenant with a pile of stones, more rocks. I come across a quote that I want to read from you. It's from Rabbi Daniel Stillman, and it was published in jewishexponent.com. I'll read it as it is written. Jacob's stones mirror the touchstones in many of our lives. Moments of experiencing the presence of God, moments of opening ourselves to love, and moments of setting new direction or boundaries so we are able to grow more fully into our true path. The stones serve Jacob as reminders of these moments, making places that he returns to thank God. Jacob teaches us to notice the sacred moments in our own life's journey, pausing at them long enough to mark them with our own version of Jacob's stones. That's a wonderful application to our life of the headstone in a Pardes reading as well. This ends the first of probably 3 videos on this week's Parashat Vayetze. My prayer is that Adonai will bless you and keep you, that He will smile lovingly upon you as He has already been gracious to you by providing Yeshua as the means of your salvation. I pray that Adonai will provide for all your needs, both physical and spiritual, and that He will give you shalom. Shalom means that He will make you complete and that He will give you peace, even in the midst of life's storms and challenges. Amen.